Had anything about Colonel Gaddafi's rantathon this afternoon. As the speed of news transmission gets faster, newspapers have turned to comment, features and entertainment to survive. But increasingly, the question they now face is whether it's worth producing a printed copy at all. And if you can't make money by selling words on paper, then how do you? Who'll pay to visit a website? David Grossman reports.
It's just after 6 o'clock in the morning. The trains over the road there have started running, but not much else is happening on this West London High Street, save for one thing. In here, one of the rituals of the British newspaper industry.
18, 19.
Shop owner Damji is marking up the round so Terry can start his delivery. The ledger, though, tells a grim story. The number of subscribers is dropping every year. The number of rounds that this shop sends out has been cut from 10 to 5.
Whereas people used to get 2 or 3 papers, now they get 1. Some of them are cutting out Sunday papers, some of them are cutting out Monday to Friday and just have the weekends, like that, you know. They just want to save money.
So how long does the route take?
It takes 1 hour.
An hour?
An hour, yeah, an hour, yeah.
I'm going to join Terry on his round. In return for helping him post a few papers, he's going to introduce me to a few of his regulars.
You got this one here, the Guardian?
Guardian?
Yeah.
Express, there's an Express here.
That's the one, that'll be, yeah, that's it, yeah. Number 12, Independent.
Independent?
Yeah.
It rapidly becomes clear that the round has widened and thinned. Fewer deliveries spread further afield.
Mail.
No, Mirror.
Oh, Mirror.
Yeah.
Here we go. I have to say, you're round. I mean, we walk a long way.
Yeah.
And then we do one paper.
That's it.
And then we walk a long way and do another paper.
Yeah, because
Has it always been like that?
No, you'd have like houses, more houses close to each other. But again, where they've moved away, the new people haven't had paper delivered.
You're basically still supplying a few houses dotted around where you would have had whole streets.
Oh yeah. And I'm lucky. I've probably got about, let's say, 50 papers a day.
Yeah.
Roughly 50 papers, where before it could have been 70.
Right.
As we continue, the sun comes up. But for the newspapers, this model, the manual delivery of physical newsprint, looks like it's approaching its twilight. Most of the customers left on the round are, shall we say, not at the dawn of life.
Hello.
Hi there. Why do you still get a paper? Why do you get a paper delivered?
Well, we haven't got the internet.
That's the only reason. Well, you would.
No. Well, no. I'd much prefer to have it like this, that I can just turn the pages over at leisure.
Next door, it's the Guardian rather than the Telegraph, but the same attachment to a physical newspaper.
I just like having it there in print and paper and touching it, having it with my coffee. And.
But this is so nice to read it in front of your coffee, but this is out of date now.
No, it's not.
Well, it is. I mean, all this stuff about Libya and anything could have happened by the time you're reading it.
Yes, but then for me it's enough to read about it tomorrow. I don't have to know it the second it happens.
So what next? Well, the newspapers are trying different ways of making money online. The FT and the Times have put up paywalls, whereas most of the rest give their stuff away for free but hope to make money on advertising. But neither model is the complete answer.
Advertising online works very differently than it works in print and in other broadcasting, and that has made it difficult to be able to have sufficient money in the digital forms to be able to replace what would be lost as one moves there.
And the fact that big players like the BBC give their content away means users are often reluctant to pay. In moving beyond newsprint, though, the newspapers have a huge opportunity. Previously, their circulation areas were limited by how far they could drive a truck or get a train to move before dawn. Now, fancy reading a copy of the Sydney Morning Herald at the same time that Sydney-siders get it? No, nor do I. But the point is, you could buy it and they could sell it. And with tablet PCs and iPads, and programs like Press Reader, you can see a print edition of a newspaper in a sort of browsable form that offers the publishers huge benefits in terms of valuable information that they can gather about what we're reading and not reading.
the difference between, say, a web presentation, a linear web presentation on the website, and a presentation that's based on the original printed edition is that they can take that information that they've collected and essentially put it against the printed edition and make editorial and layout decision that affects a day-to-day product that's being published.
In the past week, Apple has announced its version of the future of newspaper publishing, but it wants to take a 30% cut from the cover price. Google has followed with their OnePass. They want a 10% proposed fee. But whatever system the newspapers settle on, it's unlikely they'll be as multifunctional as Terry. As well as delivering the news in his time, he's brought milk, spotted break-ins, recovered stolen property, found cats, checked on the frail, brought homesick Poles together, discovered passed out.
You're part of the big society.
Oh, I probably am, yeah. yeah. Probably definitely am.
Well, with us now, the editor of the Financial Times, Lionel Barber, the BBC's Director General, Mark Thompson, the editor of The Guardian, Alan Rusbridger, and Peter Barron, Director of External Affairs at Google, who used to edit some television news programme some time ago. Now, Alan Rusbridger, do you think it makes any difference? Does it matter if it's not printed on paper?
Well, I think the paper is a wonderful thing. It's had 2 centuries in which it brought news in a highly condensed and edited way at a single moment of impact. But you can see from that film that it is a Victorian method of distribution and printing.
Do you think
the opportunity for journalism digitally is huge?
OK,
so,
we're going to come
so
to
not necessarily.
Well, to explore that a bit. But do you think it matters if it's not on paper?
No, I think what really matters is first-class content, which can be adapted for various platforms. I mean, I hate to say it, Jeremy, but this is a bit of yesterday's problem, whether newspapers are dead or not. They are dying in some places, but what is really happening in the industry is website traffic is going up, and we have new devices like the tablet, which is very, very good for great content. Okay. It's a kind of dynamic newspaper.
Right. I was just asking you whether it mattered if it wasn't printed on paper anymore.
Well, of
you
course,
don't think it does?
Not really.
Okay.
No, well,
right.
one caveat, now, Jeremy. It's very important for advertising because there are higher advertising rates for newspaper compared to websites.
Do you think our life changes if things aren't printed on paper?
I think things will continue to be printed on paper for some time to come. And there's an element of time and place here. So, for example, if you're going home on the tube, the Evening Standard is what you want to read on the tube. At the weekend, you might want to sit down with the Sunday papers and enjoy them. But during the week, maybe you want on your digital device, on your handheld device, just to see a headline. So I think there's a time and a place.
The BBC, of course, has never produced newspapers. It's got a significant website offering, which everyone in the commercial marketplace thinks distorts the market.
Well, first things first, whatever the BBC stands for, it stands for high quality news free at the point of use. Now, for us, you know, our story began not with print, but with radio and then television. But I have to say, my view about this debate is no one medium is indispensable, and no one medium is enough now to satisfy the way people want news.
But the BBC has taken the decision to go into widespread dissemination of words on the internet. You accept that distorts the market?
To be honest, I don't. I mean, we know that the overwhelming majority of people who use the BBC's website, it's the most trusted news website probably in the world, certainly in this country. The overwhelming majority of the people who use the website want it to be there and want it to be free.
Do you guys feel it distorts the market?
It does, but as a consumer of the BBC, I think it's wonderful. So I resent it and admire it at the same time.
If you're in the general news market, you will be squeezed by the BBC, and I think the BBC has recognised this by cutting the amount of money it's devoting to the website.
Now, the key thing here is how we know news costs money to produce, comment costs money to produce, everything in this machine costs money. How do you persuade people to pay for it when so much of it is freely available through the auspices of things like Google?
Well, the reason that
you're making money out of it, aren't you? You're not contributing anything at all.
We don't really make money out of news search. We make our money from commercial searches. So if you search for digital camera, you'll see a lot of advertising. But if you search for David Cameron, you won't see much advertising. But what we're doing, what we're doing is that we are sending clicks through Google News and other services through to the websites of the newspapers, and once there, that's a commercial opportunity for the paper. So we send about 1 billion clicks a month through to those pages.
And Jeremy, if I can also say...
You're doing this out of the goodness of your hearts, are you?
Well, we are working very closely with the newspaper partners.
See, Rupert Murdoch says you're guilty of theft, effectively.
To be fair, Jeremy, he said that a couple of years ago, and if you see...
you've changed your behaviour, have you?
Well, we have been talking to the publishing industry. We've been working very closely with the likes of Alan and Lionel over many months. Whether you choose the paywall model or whether you choose the ad-supported model, we're very keen to work.
I think Peter's being rather modest. Actually, Google has been very constructive because it significantly changed its attitude of 2 years ago, where essentially one click and free. Everything has to be free. They've recognised that actually, as you say, Jeremy, if you're going to have, like the FT, more than 100 foreign correspondents around the world, it costs, and therefore they have adapted the model to allow paywalls to actually exist and thrive. So they've restricted some of their articles.
Just explain how it works, what a paywall is.
Well, for the Financial Times, we operate what's called a meter model, so you can, on a frequency basis. So if you want to have access to the Financial Times website, you need to register. And once you've registered, you get a certain number of articles free, and then you have to subscribe.
OK, let's have another model. The Guardian website is free, isn't it?
It's free.
How long is it going to stay free?
As long as we can keep it free. I mean, we're all experimenting at the moment. Lionel's got one model, Mark's got another. But you have to accept that for general news, the more you try and restrict the audience, the more you lessen your impact, and you lessen the revenues too.
Is there a difference? Now you've got a premium product aimed at basically people with pretty deep pockets, a very specialised commodity, financial information in particular. That's easier to set up on a paywall website, isn't it, than many other more general products?
This is true, but if you look at the Daily Mail, they have an extremely successful website.
Which is free.
Which is free. And I think one of the reasons is they have very good content. You may not always agree with it, Jeremy, but it's distinctive, and it's got a niche area which appeals not just in the UK, but also... They are making some money. They have not revealed exactly, but they've got a big audience, for example, in the United States.
See, the difficulty here, Mark, is that people have got used to stuff being free, and the BBC doesn't help in that.
But if I may say, it's not like a newsstand. The web is not like a newsstand where people are deciding, I'm going to buy this paid-for newspaper or this free one. It's much more open. Every month, there are 14 million click-throughs from the BBC's news website to the national newspaper websites. In other words, there's an enormous movement of traffic from the BBC's free site to advertising-funded sites and to paid-for sites.
And there is money in free. I mean, we've made about 30 million in digital revenues last year, and we're reaching a bigger audience than The Guardian has ever reached. 50 years ago, we'd sold...
You're not more confident about it being able to continue free, then?
It's not enough yet. We're in this painful transition where the money available in digital is about a third of what we can get in print, which is why newspapers, God bless them, have still got a future as long as we can make them last. But I think the influence and the reach of the paper, the fact that the Guardian is now read on the streets of Cairo and Washington and London freely, is going to be the thing that's going to create something of real influence and value.
How does it look from Google's point of view?
I think the point is we're at an early stage in this, and we're clearly in a period of transition, and the transition is very difficult. And I think we all know that there's no simple silver bullet that's going to resolve these problems anytime soon. But where we are is that we're in a period of experimentation, and what we've done with the one-pass model, which is a payment system which newspapers can take advantage of, is to try to give a very flexible means of setting up a payment system. So you can have a subscription, or you can have a pay-by article, or you can have a metered model. And for readers, they can then sign up once, and then they can access this material right across the board.
One can be a lot more optimistic about this, Jeremy, because what you're seeing in the newspaper industry with the growth of a subscription business, Financial Times got more than 200,000 from a low base just a few years ago, is you then know your customer. Whereas those shots that we just saw on television with people maybe going up at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:30 in the morning at the railway station on a casual purchase, you don't know who your customer is.
OK, we're going to explore some of the implications of this in a moment or two, because the evangelists for the new digital gospel claim we're on the threshold of a wonderful new world in which information becomes disintermediated, a jargon word for cutting out the middleman. They're forever telling us of a paradise in which the professional journalist is as useful as a costermonger or a postilion in a microchip factory. They've been thrust aside by so-called citizen journalists. Well, Anne McElvoy, who belongs to this benighted trade as the policy editor of The Economist, thinks it's rubbish.
Journalists, we're a self-effacing bunch. We like to think that what we write matters and that we shine interpreting big events like the Libya coverage on the front pages this week.
I started out in journalism here in Fleet Street, and I've spent all my working life reporting, commentating and editing for newspapers. But quality journalism does face real challenges and threats. Newspaper circulations are declining, and there's also a growing challenge from the ready availability of news and comment on the internet.
That's a huge change from the profession I joined when my first foreign assignment was to East Berlin, where I covered the fall of the Berlin Wall. Today, few news operations keep correspondents in autocratic backwaters, following the daily life of a country. The rise of the citizen journalist provides cheaper competition. One advocate of new media journalism thinks that's just fine.
That seems to me like you're putting the cart before the horse. You want to put sociability above quality. Doesn't that really subvert what quality journalism is supposed to be about?
I mean, absolutely, this is the pressures that they're under. I mean, we also see a lot of, news outlets writing stories specifically so that the headlines are oriented towards search engines and social media and so on.
So there's not many stories about French politics in British newspapers these days without Carla Sarkozy in there because she sells.
Absolutely.
WikiLeaks is a good example of individuals finding new ways to break government secrecy. But it's indigestible without the skills of experienced journalists finding the best stories and analysing their significance. But money's tight, and proprietors will try just about anything to stem their losses. Mark Wood's been an editor, chief executive, and now the boss of a magazine and digital company. So what does he think we should do to enhance our journalism?
I think Britain has fantastic quality journalism now, and I don't see that we are in a worse position than we've been in the past. And I think you see good writers, good commentators taking command of the new media. Look at what Stephen Fry does. Stephen Fry has 2.5 million followers on Twitter, but amongst that group, it's not just because he's a celeb, amongst that group of people who will follow every word Stephen Fry says about technology, because he is one of the world's best, sharpest, funniest commentators on new tech.
I don't agree that a big following alone is the same as incisive journalism. It's no longer the hierarchical Fleet Street of the 50s, but quality journalism can survive if news organisations are clear that it's still at the heart of what they want to do. After that, it's down to the consumer. Do we really want the serious media we claim to care about? The judge and jury, dear reader, is you.
Well, Anne McElvoy has joined us now. What does it matter if journalists become a dying breed?
Well, I think it matters for the reasons that I was trying to lay out there. I think it matters that you're able to interpret what goes on in the world, that your analysis is of the best quality that you can deliver. It matters that people know what's going on in their country and beyond, and I think journalism plays a role in that.
And it matters that it comes through somebody else's set of perceptions, prejudices and the rest.
Well, it matters because journalism, like any other trade, has some expertise and experience attached to it. That's why it has value.
Patronising view of the world, isn't it?
No, I don't think it's patronising at all. I think expertise is something that we respect across the professions.
You make a case for it.
Well, look at the difference between Egypt and Libya. So in Egypt, there were journalists in there watching what was going on. In Libya, not so much, if at all. I think Anne's case of WikiLeaks was an excellent one. 300 million words would have been completely meaningless if it had been dumped on the internet, as well as being completely unsafe. And it took months of Guardian, New York Times, Der Spiegel journalists going through and finding the stories, redacting them and making sense of them. So the journalist still has a valuable role as mediator and analyzer and finder and verifier of stories.
Are you a subscriber to this mystique?
Certainly journalism is extremely valuable. I mean, societies are better with with journalism and democracy is better that journalism exists. But the point here is that there's been a massive democratization in access to information and the ability to publish information. So everybody these days can be a publisher. Now, only a very small...
You can't believe half of it.
Well, yes, but what you've seen time and time again is that the very high-quality material rises to the top and becomes a trusted brand alongside the trusted brands that already exist.
I think that's exactly the point, that it cannot be. Citizen journalism is incredibly valuable. The fact that so many people have got access to, via the internet, telling their version of events is a wonderful thing, but it cannot substitute for, if you like, the classical apprenticeship and skills of journalism and the kind of standards that great newspapers and great broadcasting companies can bring to bear. And I think the key thing is, together, they've actually enriched the way the news works. If we believe that one is going to replace the other, I think it's a real problem. And they don't, in the end, in Egypt, in the end, in the square, they're listening to, the BBC Arabic service and looking at Al Jazeera and so forth, because actually people want the combination
and they're
of the
talking
two.
to each other on Facebook and their Twitter streaming and all the rest of it.
Which is all of that, I think, is exactly, if you like, what the enrichment of the news environment's been. But the danger, clearly, which Aaron's pointing to, is if you honestly believe that removing all the professional, high-quality journalistic content from the world and subsisting entirely on Twitter and Facebook is going to leave us with a
Jeremy,
properly...
we need to make a clear distinction between what I would describe as social interaction, one source story on events, versus something which is, at its best, a craft. And that is that you test with multiple sources an account of events. You try to have a degree of objectivity. You revise for accuracy. That's journalism. That is something completely different from the Twitterati.
The citizen journalism hasn't really been tested yet. We're writing a lot about it and reflecting on it, but really what we've seen is it being very active and also being a very valuable source, I should say, but in situations where we kind of know generally which side we're on. We know that there are these autocrats, they're being driven from power, and that the story is on the street. I think citizen journalism will have a much tougher time when we have situations which will arise where we're really not sure which side should have the upper hand, or indeed what's really going on. And that's an area where I think you come back to your question, you do rely a bit on the old trade to have analysis skills and to help you out there.
Well, if it's so important, why is funding for journalism being cut virtually everywhere?
Because there are commercial pressures on the industry. I think everybody, agrees on that. We've had a number of models explained around the table tonight. But what I would say, news organisations shouldn't rest on their laurels, and they do often tend to say they're in favour of quality.
You sound like a lot of vested interest defending your vested interest.
We have to puncture this bubble of unanimity, I think. Because we're not talking about Twitter, and I know you're going to hate this, Jeremy, but Twitter does extraordinary things that journalists
no one denies that.
And we're not talking about we talk about citizen journalists in a dismissive way, but actually
we're not.
Well, there's something about the phrase citizen journalist that I think that carries a sort of sniff about it.
Citizen is a fine thing to be, is it not?
But I think what we've learnt is that these tools that we've had for 200 years as journalists to ourselves, you give them to other people, A, they want to use them, there's ability to publish and link and share material, and B, there are real experts out there. There are wonderful scientists and environmentalists and lawyers and cultural writers who are every bit as good as journalists, and the brilliant opportunity for us is to link them and collaborate with them.
Journalists have lost their monopoly role as gatekeepers to this flow of information. There are others now on stage, but that does not render their role redundant.
No, absolutely not. But there are two different types of citizen journalism. There is the right place at right time, so it's the person who sees the mudslide or is in Tahrir Square, and then there's the expert. So there's journalists have to get up to speed on subject matter very, very quickly, and we can tap in these days through the better means of communication into the great expertise of a lot of people who are out there.
But surely a better critical point, if you think that we're all being a bit trade union-y here tonight, do you not think that really papers and news news outlets should be looking much more at the quality of their analysis and comment. And does it really live up to what they say? I mean, I find so many things now described as quality in journalism, but I don't really know where quality
your piece was full of about how you worked in quality journalism.
Yes, well, I know, because that's what I like to think that I do, and other people can agree or disagree. But I do think that there is, if the big selling point, which we've all sort of said in different forms, is that it is supposed to be this brilliant and persuasive analysis, then you have to stand by it, and you sometimes have to give space to it and not to froth.
I want to move this on just slightly, which is what happens to a society when people start following and are able to follow their own very narrow interests quite often, and they get a different view of the world than the world which is presented to them by, say, a newspaper for the sake of argument, or a broadcasting organisation, which is a much broader view. Something happens to a society then, doesn't it?
That's one thing that's going on. But as the film, when we saw Terry posting his Daily Express through that door and the Guardian through that door, actually, I think the world is much more open now, that people can challenge. They can go to the Daily Express and within a minute they can go to the Guardian, within a minute they can go to the Financial Times. That seems to be a much more promiscuous world in which people can test sources against each other, and that's the world we live in. Quite apart, it's very different from that world in which you either took the Daily Express or the Telegraph or the Guardian.
There's certainly much more access to information broadly, but also I think the future is in personalisation of news. The truth is that a newspaper offering at the moment can't appeal to everybody. It is one size fits all. And if you look at the future of personalised news, the opportunities for advertising, apart from anything else, and the opportunities for sustainability are much greater.
You need to be able to harness the technology to offer, if you like, the Daily Me, where the news organisation like the Financial Times can say, if you're interested in commodities or oil prices, that's what you can get on your browser.
But something happens to a society when people are only following the Daily Me.
That's Jeremy's point, that if everyone's reading the Daily Me and nothing else, that's the problem.
But this is a tool that technology increasingly enables, isn't it?
But it enables personalisation. It also enables serendipity.
Is it good?
It's good that people can get more personal...
Well, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, what's interesting is if it could be achieved, of course personalisation, so you can gather the media you want, but also on some media, which is why I think television remains incredibly important in news, of places where you are confronted with the other. You're confronted with different opinions, opposing
Lots of angry
ideas.
citizen journalists out there. Look at those
and crucially, to Mark's point, a sense of community. That you're not moving more towards this, to want a better word, an atomized society where people are only interested in very narrow things. I think it's important, if you look at our traffic, for example, on the website and the newspaper, more than 50% of FT readers take both the website and the newspaper, which suggests that they see complementary viewing, that they want something narrow, they can browse, they spend a very short time. It's a very different reading experience.
It's got a lot
2
more
to 3 minutes on the website.
2 to 3 minutes?
2 to 3 minutes.
What
and
can
then
you
they're
learn in
browsing,
2 to 3
flipping
minutes?
then they'll come back. They can go to the BBC, whereas on a newspaper, and interestingly, on the iPad, which is why I talked about the iPad as a dynamic, interactive type of newspaper. There on the iPad, you're spending 15, or on a tablet, I should say, but not give Apple too much publicity, but 15 to 20 minutes. It's more like a newspaper reading experience, which is very encouraging for us.
And it's also a big challenge for journalism because it can't just be written words anymore. It needs to be words and video and data and commerce as well.
It is very striking, isn't it, when you look at teenagers, for example, now, or very early 20s. They are taking in information from a multiplicity of media at the same time. And the future is not with any one, is it?
I think it's worth saying as well that video in particular, I think one of the things we're going to see as the technology and the distribution networks are better and better at handling video, I think you're going to see much more in the way of moving pictures around news and sound. And I think another challenge for newspapers is just how rich audiovisually the experience is going to be, and particularly for younger users, they're going to expect every single picture to move and to speak when they touch it.
There comes a point then when you're not really a newspaper at all, are you? Or some sort of media resource, in the same way as the BBC's in words, you're in video, and you're presumably in video too.
Well, I stopped calling myself a newspaper editor several years ago, actually.
Well, what do you call yourself now?
Head of the news organisation, Jeremy. Didn't you get with the programmes?
We publish all our stories first online. I mean, we could have told the whole WikiLeaks story online, and in a sense we did. It's very nice that some people still want to consume it in print, and we need them, but I mean, this feels like a slightly old-fashioned debate, because I think this polarity between us professionals and them, the citizens, is blurring. And, you know, we couldn't tell the story of Egypt without multiplicity of sources. And that's what news organisations have to do, is to collaborate with these wonderful publishers and the citizen journalists and create a blend of what we do and they do best.
Absolutely, and all that can still lead to concentrated long-form journalism, but only if you as editors are prepared to stick with that and not be entirely distracted by the brave new world and the many technologically fantastic things.
What do you think 2 years of phone hacking investigations, 6 months of WikiLeaks, 3 years of British aerospace investigations are? And we're still doing this, but it's in a sense as the platform on which it's published is less relevant.
If you want to do deep and original journalism, which certainly I think Alan is committed to, at the Financial Times, we're committed to that type of journalism. It costs money and it takes time, and it is a world apart from Facebook, Twitter, this kind of what I call social interaction. But Alan is correct that you need to take account of it, but you don't need to allow it to dominate your thinking, and you don't need to give up the ghost.
OK, thank you all very much indeed. Tomorrow morning's front pages, we'll look both at the front pages and at the websites. The Financial Times front page, there it is, and the website offering is... Oh, good heavens, it's available. Well, there it is, and it looks a bit different. Yes, and there's the Daily Mail's front page, and the Daily Mail's website is that, which is unreadable from this distance. And that's the Guardian's front page, and the Guardian website is slightly different. The Times front page and the Times website, and there's the Independent front page, and the Independent's website is marginally different. Well, that's quite enough for now. More tomorrow. Good night.